Hello, biologists. It's Mr. B here, and I would like to welcome you to our first online example slash mini lesson for the genetics unit, and specifically Punnett squares. So I hope to post lots of examples throughout the course of the next couple weeks online on this YouTube channel. So feel free to keep checking back over the coming days and weeks, and some stuff should be up, and then you can always go back on these and check them out as you go. Um, I will also say that I'll take requests. If there's any problems that you're having particular trouble understanding, you can anonymously email me at mrbsciencemb@gmail.com, which will be posted online, mrbsciencemb@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to take a look. Um, with that in mind, here are, as I'm trying to click, here we go. Here are the the 5 steps we're gonna go through for each of these Punnett square problems. These are listed on the front of all your practice books, but I'm just gonna take a second here to talk about them, and then we're gonna solve this first example using these 5 steps. It's a good way to organize your workflow and make sure it matches up to what we're expecting and how you can show work and gain marks, because each one of these steps is going to be worth marks come any time for like an assessment or exam or anything like that, because these questions are all about breaking down the information systematically, organizing it, and then drawing conclusions. So this kind of leads you through that. Number one, we're going to define alleles. What are alleles? You should all be screaming versions of a gene. So alleles are going to be your versions of a gene, whether they be dominant or recessive. And yeah, then, what is a genotype? A genotype is the combination of two alleles that a parent gets from, well, the grandparent. So we're going to determine the parent genotypes. That means we have to find out if the mother and the father are like heterozygous, homozygous, dominant, recessive, whatever they may be. We have to figure that out before we can set up a Punnett square. Then, once we have the parent genotypes, we want to determine what gametes they can make. Those are possible genes or possible alleles that they can pass on to their children, and that's what we'll be using to arrange the Punnett square. Then we have to make the Punnett square itself. Then once we've made the Punnett square, we're going to interpret it as a genotypic ratio and a phenotypic ratio. The genotypic ratio we express as a fraction, and the phenotypic ratio as a percent. Also, sometimes you may have to answer the question it's asking you, like maybe what's the probability that the child has freckles, something like that. So make sure you read the questions carefully, because that'll be your guide as to where you're ultimately meant to end up. All right, so let's read this question very slowly and very carefully, because that's a good way to start all these problems is you read it very carefully. And whenever there's important information, you make sure you get it down on the page. So first, dimples is a dominant trait. That's important. A woman with dimples and a homozygous phenotype, also important, has children with a man without dimples, equally important. What are the genotypic and phenotypic ratios of their children? So I'm going to go back and read that as we try to answer these 5 steps. But make sure you read these really carefully because all the information is packed into those couple sentences there, and it's up to us to unpack them and work with them. So step 1 is to find the alleles. I'll give you a second here. In general, I'm going to wait a second before just showing the next step, because if you want to pause here, you can work ahead and immediately check your answer, along with an explanation, which could be helpful for you studying. I recommend you try it just a second ahead. So I'll give you 1, 2, 3, and oh, that's going to shake. But 1, dimples is dominant, which means it has to be a capital letter. I went with the letter D because it looks different when it's capital and lowercase. Make sure your letters look different, capital and lowercase. Otherwise, this will be very confusing for everyone. so so here we picked a D, which looks nice and different. So we put dimples for dominant, capital D, and no dimples for recessive as a lowercase d. So now we have to find what dominant means and what recessive means in the course of this question, and we set a letter to each possible allele. So now we have to figure out the parent genotypes. Again, I encourage you to take a second here to pause this and try it on your own. Have you paused it? Okay, great. So dimples is a dominant trait, and a woman with dimples. So someone with dimples, we know that's dominant, but the dominant phenotype is going to show whether or not you have 2 capital Ds, 2 dominant alleles, or a capital D and a lowercase d, heterozygous. But here it says a woman with dimples and a homozygous phenotype has children. So that means homozygous and dominant. That means they have to be two capital Ds. Then a man without dimples. If a man doesn't have dimples, that means they have the recessive phenotype, which means they must have two recessive alleles, otherwise it would be masked. So what we see here then is these are our fancy signs. The male is this arrow pointing upwards. You're going to see that a lot. So those are all over my keys too. So make sure you figure out what these signs mean. The one pointing upwards, the male sign. The one pointing downwards is a female sign. The arrows, the men, little cross things, the woman. But this is just easier than writing male and female every single time. So here we have the male, and they have no dimples. So they must be homozygous recessive, which is lowercase d, lowercase d. Then the female, we have dimples and homozygous, so homozygous dominant, so capital D, capital D. Great. So now we have to determine the possible gametes. Again, pause it here, take a second and see if you can figure this out. Alrighty, so for the male, we have a homozygous recessive genotype, so that he only has little d alleles, so he could only possibly pass on little d alleles. He can't pass on a dominant gene because he doesn't have it in his genotype, so it's not there to pass on. Similarly, the mother only has the dominant allele, so she can't pass on the recessive. So we see that the male can only pass on a recessive allele, and the female can only pass on a dominant allele. Cool. So now Punnett square. Again, feel free to pause, take a second, make it. And I will give you a little hint here. There's an easy way and a hard way of doing this. All right, so here's our blank Punnett square. One rule of Punnett squares is just the rule. Don't question it because it's the rule, because it is, because that's the reason. But the rule is that females always go in the top two boxes here on a Punnett square, and the male will always go along the side. So females are always on top, and males can be along the side here. So we're going to take the gametes from the female and put them along top. So we got big D, and then we're going to take the males and put them along the side. So little d, little d. Now you may be astute and notice something here. All these boxes are the exact same because this gamete's the same as this one, and this one's the same as that one. So when you have cases like this, the easy way is to just do each of them once. Because if I'll show you here, the combinations are going to be the same in every single box. If this was a recessive allele, you'd have to do all the crosses. But here, because it's this little d and big D and big D, we can just get rid of that and it'll be the exact same thing. So here, once you've covered that up, this becomes a really easy cross. We're just going to take the big D from this box, the dominant allele, and mix it with the recessive allele here, and we get big D, little d. Now, seeing as we've completed our Punnett square, why not take a second and try to figure out the genotypic and phenotypic ratios? Remember, genotypic is a fraction, phenotypic as a percent. Take a second. All right, so our genotypic ratio is 1 out of 1 DD because there's one possibility here. It's only one box, and the one genotype there is big D, little d. And we call this what? Heterozygous. You should all be screaming heterozygous, but heterozygous means we have one of the recessive alleles and one of the dominant alleles as the genotype. So they're all heterozygous. Then our phenotypic ratio, they all have a dominant allele present, so they're all going to have the dominant phenotype, which in this case is dimples. So we have 100% of the offspring have dimples. All right, biologists, over the next few days, I hope to post a lot more examples leading up throughout this unit. And if you have any specific ones that you'd like to be seen, please send me an email. That's MrBScience, MB, MrBScienceMB @gmail.com. And yeah, good luck, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.